My name is Amber Wilson, I'm 32, and last month I finally bought my dream apartment in downtown Boston after saving for 10 years. I spent weeks preparing the perfect housewarming party to show my family what I'd accomplished on my own. I cooked for 2 days straight, decorated every inch, and waited by the door with champagne chilled. But as the hours passed, the doorbell never rang. Not a single family member showed up. Sometimes the moments we achieve our biggest dreams become our loneliest battles. Before I dive into what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt invisible to the people who should see you most clearly. Trust me, this story has an ending none of us expected. I grew up in Westford, a small town about 30 miles outside of Boston. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your business before you did, and dreams were kept practical and close to home. My father, Richard Wilson, worked as a bank manager at the local branch for 30 years. He was a man of strict routines and even stricter expectations. My mother Diana was a kindergarten teacher who somehow managed to be warm and nurturing with her students but distant and passive at home, especially when it came to standing up to my father. Then there was my older sister Heather. 3 years my senior and forever the golden child, Heather followed our father's life plan to perfection: community college nearby, marriage to her high school sweetheart Brad at 22, and a job at the same bank as our father. By 30, she had the prescribed 2 children, a colonial-style house 3 blocks from our parents, and the constant approval I never seemed to earn. From as early as I can remember, I dreamed of living in Boston. The skyline called to me whenever we drove in for special occasions, all glittering lights and towering buildings filled with people doing exciting things. When I mentioned wanting to live there someday during Sunday dinner at age 16, my father laughed. "Downtown living is for people who don't understand the value of a dollar," he said, cutting his pot roast with precision. "Besides, what would you even do there? You're a small-town girl, Amber." My mother nodded along, while Heather smirked from across the table. That was the first time I realized my dreams would never fit inside the box my family had constructed for me. When I got accepted to Boston University at 18, my parents were hesitant but agreed to help with tuition if I commuted from home. Instead, I applied for every scholarship available, took out loans, and moved into a cramped dorm room with a stranger. The day I moved out, my father stood in the driveway with his arms crossed. "When real life gets too hard, don't come crying back to us," he said as I loaded the last box into my friend's car. Those first years were brutally difficult. I worked 3 part-time jobs while maintaining a full course load. Waiting tables in the morning, administrative work at the university in the afternoons, and bartending on weekends. I lived on ramen noodles and free food from the restaurants where I worked. While my classmates went home for holidays and breaks, I picked up extra shifts. Every time I called home, I was greeted with some version of "I told you so" whenever I mentioned being tired or stressed. Despite it all, I graduated with a degree in marketing and landed an entry-level position at a boutique agency. The starting salary was modest, but it was a foot in the door. I shared an apartment with 3 other girls in a neighborhood no one would call glamorous, but it was mine, and it was in Boston. Over the next decade, I climbed steadily upward. From coordinator to specialist to manager to director. Each promotion came with longer hours and higher expectations, but also with a salary increase that I diligently saved. While friends splurged on designer clothes and luxury vacations, I lived modestly with a single goal in mind: owning my own place in the city I loved. Last spring, at 31, I began house hunting. My real estate agent, Tiffany, showed me dozens of properties over 6 months. Some were close but not quite right, wrong neighborhood, too dark, outdated kitchens. And then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, she called with excitement in her voice. "I have something that just hit the market. It's at the top of your budget, but I think you need to see it today." The moment I walked into the 9th-floor apartment on Beacon Hill, I knew. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the Charles River and Boston skyline. Hardwood floors gleamed under recessed lighting. The kitchen featured white marble countertops and stainless steel appliances. There were 2 bedrooms, one for me and one I could use as a home office. The building had a small gym, a rooftop deck, and secure entry. It was perfect. It was everything I'd worked for. The bidding war was intense, but I offered every penny I'd saved plus the maximum my loan pre-approval allowed. When Tiffany called to tell me my offer had been accepted, I sank to the floor of my rented apartment and sobbed with joy. After years of sacrifice, doubt, and determination, I'd done it. The closing process took 6 weeks, during which I selected new furniture, planned paint colors, and coordinated renovations for the outdated bathroom. I visited the empty apartment at least once a week, standing in the living room and watching the sunset over the city, hardly believing it would be mine. I called my parents the day I signed the final paperwork. "I did it," I said, my voice trembling with pride. "I bought an apartment in Beacon Hill." The silence on the other end lasted several seconds before my mother responded. "Well, I hope you know what you're getting yourself into. Those maintenance fees will eat you alive." I pushed down my disappointment. "I've done all the calculations, Mom. I can afford it. I was hoping maybe you and Dad would come see it once I'm settled." Another pause. "We'll see, honey. Your father doesn't like driving in the city." I expected that response but pushed forward anyway. "Actually, I'm planning a housewarming party in 3 weeks, once the bathroom renovation is complete. I'd really love for all of you to come. Heather and Brad and the kids too." "I'll talk to your father," she said, which had always been code for "don't get your hopes up." But this time I refused to be discouraged. This was my moment, my achievement, and surely they would recognize how hard I'd worked. I followed up with a formal invitation sent through the mail to both my parents' house and Heather's. I created a digital invitation for extended family, cousins, aunts, and uncles, most of whom lived within an hour's drive. I spent weeks preparing for that party. I selected the perfect hors d'oeuvres that would impress without seeming pretentious. I bought champagne that cost more than I'd normally spend on a week's worth of groceries. I cleaned and decorated until every surface gleamed and every corner reflected my personality. My mother called a week before the party. "We'll try to make it," she said, which gave me a flicker of hope. Heather texted, "The kids are excited to see Aunt Amber's new place." My cousin Alice wrote, "Can't wait to see this fancy apartment of yours." As the party approached, I began to believe that this milestone might be the thing that finally bridged the gap between my family and me. That they might finally see me not as the rebellious daughter who rejected their way of life, but as a successful woman who had achieved something meaningful on her own terms. The night before the housewarming, I stood in my new home, everything prepared and perfect, feeling a sense of completion I'd never experienced before. Tomorrow, I thought, would be the beginning of a new chapter, not just in my living situation, but in my relationship with my family. How wrong I was. The morning of the housewarming party dawned bright and clear, a perfect early autumn day in Boston. Sunlight streamed through my new windows, casting long golden rectangles across my freshly polished hardwood floors. I'd been up since 6, too excited to sleep, putting final touches on the apartment and preparing cold dishes ahead of time. At 9:17 a.m., my phone chimed with a text message. It was Heather. "So sorry sis, both kids woke up with fever and sore throats. Don't want to risk bringing germs to your new place. Rain check?" I stared at the message, a small knot forming in my stomach. It was disappointing, but understandable. Kids get sick. It happens. I texted back. "Oh no. Hope they feel better soon. Definitely rain check. I'll save some champagne for you." I tried to shake off the disappointment as I arranged a charcuterie board, carefully placing prosciutto roses and fan-like slices of manchego cheese. The party wasn't until 4 o'clock. Plenty of other people were coming. At 10:30 a.m., my phone rang. It was my mother. "Amber, honey, I hate to do this, but I don't think we'll be able to make it today." The knot in my stomach tightened. "Why not?" "Your father isn't feeling well. He's been having those tension headaches again, and you know how driving in the city makes them worse." I gripped the phone tighter. "I could come pick you up." Or you could take the commuter rail. There's a station a few blocks from here. Oh, I don't think your father is up for public transportation today. Maybe another time? When he's feeling better. I swallowed hard. Sure, Mom. Another time. By noon, the pattern had become unmistakable. My cousin Alice texted that her babysitter had cancelled. Uncle Jim and Aunt Barbara suddenly remembered a prior commitment. My cousin Thomas had car trouble. One by one, every member of my extended family found a reason they couldn't attend. Still, I continued preparing. I still had friends coming. My college roommate Lindsay, my work colleagues, my neighbor from my old apartment building. The family disappointment stung, but I was used to their absence in my life's big moments. I arranged fresh flowers in the crystal vase my boss had given me as a housewarming gift. I hung the custom Home Sweet Home sign I'd ordered from an Etsy artist. I chilled the champagne and set out the wine glasses I'd carefully wrapped in bubble wrap during the move. As I worked, memories surfaced of previous family gatherings where I'd felt invisible. My college graduation, where my parents and sister left immediately after the ceremony, skipping the reception because Heather's son had a t-ball game that afternoon. My 30th birthday, which no one remembered until 3 days later. The promotion celebration my colleagues threw me last year, where the empty seats I'd reserved for family became an unspoken embarrassment. At 2:45 p.m., my phone chimed again. My friend Morgan, who lived in New York but had promised to make the train journey for my special day. Amber, I'm devastated. Train derailed ahead of mine. All service suspended. Stuck in New Haven with no way to get to you in time. I'm so sorry. We'll call tonight. Your place looks gorgeous from the pics. So proud of you. I texted back a reassurance that I understood, even as tears pricked at my eyes. Morgan was the one person I could always count on, and even she couldn't make it, though for legitimate reasons. By 3:30 p.m., my phone was a symphony of last-minute cancellations. Lindsay's daughter had an allergic reaction to something she ate at lunch. My colleague Jason's mother was in the hospital. My old neighbor had a burst pipe in her bathroom. Some tiny, suspicious part of me wondered if there was some conspiracy at work. Was I just catastrophizing, or was it strange that literally everyone had an emergency today? But that was ridiculous. These were separate people from different parts of my life. They didn't even know each other. 4 o'clock came and went. My apartment was spotless, filled with the aroma of gourmet appetizers and the soft jazz playlist I'd curated. The ice in the champagne bucket slowly melted. I sat on my new sofa, alone in my dream apartment, surrounded by untouched food and unopened wine bottles. By 5 o'clock, I accepted that no one was coming. I poured myself a glass of champagne and walked to the window, looking out at the city I'd worked so hard to make my home. Tears slid down my cheeks as I raised my glass in a silent toast to myself. Congratulations, Amber, I whispered. You did it all on your own. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. How was your party, honey? I stared at it for a long moment before setting my phone face down on the coffee table without responding. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my empty apartment, I scrolled through social media to distract myself. And that's when I saw it, a photo posted by my cousin Alice just 30 minutes ago. A family gathering at my parents' house. In the background, I could see my mother smiling. My father with no sign of a headache. Heather's children running through the yard, looking perfectly healthy. The caption read, Sunday family dinner at Uncle Richard and Aunt Diana's. #family tradition #blessed. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't been busy or sick or dealing with emergencies. They simply chose not to come. Worse, they had all gathered without me on the very day of my housewarming. I zoomed in on the photo, studying the faces of the people who had supposedly loved me my entire life. Had they all coordinated their excuses? Had they laughed about it? Was I the family joke once again, Amber and her fancy city apartment that none of them needed to validate? At 9:42 p.m., my phone lit up with a text that made my heart stop. It was from Alice. Oops, sent to wrong person. Great seeing everyone today. Uncle Richard makes the best steaks. She'd clearly meant to send it to someone else in the family group. Seconds later, another text, OMG, ignore that. So sorry. Too late. The damage was done. I now had confirmation of what I'd suspected. My entire family had deliberately boycotted my housewarming to attend a regular Sunday dinner at my parents' house. I curled up on my new sofa, surrounded by untouched food and undrunk champagne, and cried until I had no tears left. The beautiful apartment that had represented all my hopes and dreams now felt like a hollow monument to my isolation. After the text from Alice, I sat in stunned silence for nearly an hour. The beautiful apartment I'd worked so hard for suddenly felt cold and empty, its high ceilings and large windows making me feel small and exposed. I wrapped myself in a throw blanket, trying to process what had happened. With shaking hands, I poured another glass of champagne and called my sister. She answered on the fourth ring, voices and laughter in the background. Hello? Heather sounded distracted, slightly annoyed at the interruption. Hi, it's me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I just wanted to check how the kids are feeling. A pause. Oh, they're better. The fever broke this afternoon. I could hear my nephew shouting excitedly about something in the background. That's good, I said. They sound energetic for kids who were so sick this morning they couldn't leave the house. Another pause, longer this time. Amber, what are you getting at? I saw Alice's post, Heather. I know you're all at Mom and Dad's. Look, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper as if she'd walked away from the gathering. It wasn't my idea, okay? Dad said he wasn't going to your city show-off party, and you know how he is. Once he makes up his mind, everyone has to fall in line. And you couldn't stand up to him? Not even once? For me? It's not that simple and you know it. You're the one who left, Amber. You're the one who decided our family wasn't good enough for you. That's not what happened and you know it, I said, my voice cracking. I just wanted something different for my life. Well, you got it. Congratulations on your fancy apartment. I've gotta go, Brad's calling me. She hung up before I could respond. I stared at my phone in disbelief, then hurled it across the room. It bounced off the sofa cushion and onto the floor. With trembling fingers, I opened Instagram again and scrolled through more photos from the family dinner. There was one of my father at the grill, looking completely healthy. Another of my mother bringing out a pie, smiling widely. My niece and nephew playing with water guns in the backyard. My cousins gathered around the picnic table. Every single person who had claimed to be sick, busy, or otherwise indisposed was there, having what looked like a wonderful time without me. I walked to the kitchen and began methodically putting away the untouched food. Wrapping cheese boards in plastic wrap. Sealing containers of dips and spreads. The movements were mechanical, my mind detached from my body as I processed the magnitude of the rejection. After the food was put away, I poured myself another glass of champagne, no sense in wasting it, and wandered through my apartment. I'd been so excited to show everyone the features I'd fallen in love with. The bay window with the reading nook. The vintage chandelier I'd found at an antique shop. The bathroom I'd renovated with subway tile and a clawfoot tub. I stopped in front of the gallery wall I'd created in the hallway. Family photos spanning decades. My parents on their wedding day. Heather and me as children building a snowman. My grandparents at their 50th anniversary. My niece and nephew as babies, cradled in my arms. In the center was a framed birthday card my father had given me on my 16th birthday. Inside, in his precise handwriting, was the message, "To my ambitious daughter, wherever life takes you, we'll always be there. Love, Dad." I took the frame off the wall and opened the back, removing the card. 16 years later, the words felt like a cruel joke. I tore the card into tiny pieces and let them fall into the trash can. By midnight, I'd finished the bottle of champagne and moved on to the red wine I'd bought for the party. The apartment felt too quiet, too large, too empty. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old text messages, looking for some evidence that my family had ever been proud of me, ever supported me, ever truly seen me. Instead, I found a pattern of missed calls, delayed responses, and lukewarm reactions to my achievements. How had I not seen it before? The signs had always been there. I'd just been too desperate for their approval to acknowledge them. At 12:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Alice. "I'm really sorry about the text mix-up. It wasn't what it looked like." I laughed bitterly. Not what it looked like? I typed back, "Was that not a family dinner at my parents' house on the same day everyone claimed they couldn't come to my housewarming?" 3 dots appeared as she typed, disappeared, appeared again. "Finally, your dad organized it last minute. Said he wanted to grill while the weather was still nice. I didn't realize it was the same day until I was already there." "And you couldn't leave? Send me a text? Tell him it was wrong to do that on the day of my party? You know how Uncle Richard gets. No one wanted to make a scene. No one wanted to make a scene. No one wanted to stand up for me. No one thought I was worth the potential discomfort. Thanks for clarifying," I typed, then turned off my phone. I spent the rest of the night alternating between rage and despair. I pulled out more family photos, studying the faces of the people who had just demonstrated how little they valued me. Had they always felt this way? Had I imagined the good memories? Had I been nothing but an inconvenience, an embarrassment, a family member to be tolerated rather than celebrated? By dawn, my sadness had crystallized into something harder, sharper. I'd spent my entire adult life seeking validation from people who had no intention of ever giving it to me. I'd worked myself to exhaustion trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided I had none. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through my windows, illuminating the space I'd created for myself through years of hard work and determination, I made a decision. I would confront them. All of them. I would no longer accept being the family afterthought, the inconvenient daughter who could be dismissed and disrespected without consequence. I showered, dressed in my most confident outfit, a tailored blazer over a simple black dress, and packed up some of the untouched party food. Then I got in my car and drove toward the suburbs, toward the reckoning that was long overdue. The drive to my parents' suburban home took 45 minutes, but it felt like crossing a vast distance, not just in miles but in life choices. As I exited the highway and wound through the familiar streets of Westford, I felt a strange displacement, like visiting a place I'd known in a previous life. I pulled into my parents' driveway behind a row of familiar cars. Sunday family dinner was a tradition that apparently continued in my absence, though I hadn't been invited in years. I'd always attributed it to my busy work schedule or the distance, but now I wondered if I'd ever been welcome at all. The container of housewarming appetizers sat on the passenger seat. I gathered them, along with my resolve, and approached the front door. Rather than knocking, I used my old key, which I'd kept all these years despite rarely visiting. The sound of conversation and laughter floated from the backyard. I walked through the quiet house, noting how little had changed since my childhood. The same faded floral sofa. The same school portraits arranged chronologically on the wall, Heather's professional headshot at the end of her row, my college graduation photo at the end of mine, though I'd sent newer pictures that had apparently never been framed. I pushed open the sliding glass door to the backyard patio. The conversation stopped abruptly as heads turned in my direction. My father stood at the grill, spatula in hand. My mother froze with a pitcher of lemonade halfway to the table. Heather sat with her husband and children, her mouth open in mid-sentence. "Amber." My mother was the first to recover. "What a surprise. We weren't expecting you." "Clearly," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I held up the container. "I brought leftovers from my housewarming party. The one you all had conflicts for." An uncomfortable silence descended over the gathering. My cousins avoided eye contact. My uncle suddenly became very interested in his phone. My niece and nephew, sensing the tension, stopped playing and moved closer to their parents. My father cleared his throat. We're in the middle of a family dinner, Amber. I can see that, I replied, setting the container down on the patio table. A family dinner scheduled at the exact same time as the housewarming party I invited you all to weeks ago. Now's not the time for this discussion, my father said, his jaw tightening in the way it always did before he shut down a conversation he didn't want to have. When would be a good time, Dad? After you've all coordinated your fake excuses for the next family event I invite you to? Heather stood up, ushering her children toward the house. Kids, go watch TV inside for a bit. Once the children were gone, she turned to me. You're making a scene, Amber. This is exactly why. Why what? I challenged. Why you all decided to boycott one of the most important days of my life. Why you lied to me. Why you made me sit alone in an apartment full of food and decorations waiting for people who had no intention of showing up. It's not like that, my mother interjected, wringing her hands. Your father thought. I thought, my father cut in, that we didn't need to participate in your latest attempt to show off how much better you think your life is than ours. The bluntness of his statement stunned me into momentary silence. Richard, my mother said quietly, but he waved her off. No, Diana, it's time someone said it. Ever since she moved to the city, she's looked down on us. Our house isn't big enough, our jobs aren't important enough, our lives aren't exciting enough. And now she wants us to come celebrate how far she's risen above her humble beginnings? No thank you. I stared at him, genuinely shocked. Is that what you think? That I'm trying to show off? Aren't you? Heather chimed in. Your fancy marketing job, your downtown apartment, your sophisticated friends. Every time you visit, which is hardly ever, you talk about restaurants we can't afford and places we've never been. You make it very clear you think you're better than us. I've never thought that, I said, my voice catching. I just wanted different things than you did. That doesn't mean I look down on your choices. Please, Heather scoffed. The way you reacted when I told you I was working at Dad's bank. The look on your face when I said we were building a house 3 blocks from here. You might as well have said I'm sorry out loud. I shook my head, trying to process this distorted version of myself they all seemed to share. I've spent years trying to make you proud of me. Working myself to exhaustion to prove I could make it on my own. All I wanted yesterday was to share something I've worked incredibly hard for with the people I love. If you wanted us in your life, my father said coldly, you wouldn't have left in the first place. And there it was. The real issue, stripped of all pretense. I had committed the unforgivable sin of wanting something different, of choosing a path they hadn't prescribed for me. I didn't leave you, I said, tears welling in my eyes despite my determination not to cry. I just chose my own direction. There's a difference. Not to us, my father replied. I looked around at the faces of my extended family, searching for any ally, any sign of understanding. My cousins stared at their plates. My aunts and uncles shifted uncomfortably. No one would meet my eyes. So yesterday, I said slowly, when you all texted and called with your emergencies and illnesses and conflicts, you were coordinating with each other? You all deliberately decided to boycott my housewarming party and come here instead? The silence was answer enough. Amber, honey, my mother tried again, reaching for my hand. We didn't mean to hurt you. It's complicated. I pulled my hand away. It's actually very simple. I invited my family to celebrate a milestone with me, and instead of simply declining the invitation, you chose to lie to me and gather without me on the same day. My father put down his spatula and faced me directly. This is your problem, Amber. Everything is always about you. Your feelings, your accomplishments, your life in the city. Some of us are content with what we have. We don't need to chase bigger and better things to feel validated. This isn't about bigger and better, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. This is about you never supporting any choice I make that doesn't align with what you want for me. This is about you punishing me for having ambitions that took me away from here. We gave you everything, my father countered. A stable home, a good education, a community. And you threw it back in our faces the first chance you got. I was 18. I wanted to go to college without commuting 2 hours each way. I wanted to study marketing instead of banking or teaching. That's not rejection, that's growing up and becoming my own person. The argument escalated, years of unspoken resentment spilling out on both sides. My father accused me of thinking I was too good for the family. I accused him of conditional love based on obedience. Heather jumped in to defend our parents, painting me as the selfish sister who abandoned her family responsibilities. I pointed out how they had systematically excluded me from family events for years while pretending it was my fault for being busy. You don't even know me anymore. I finally shouted, tears streaming down my face. None of you do. You've created this caricature of me as the snobby city girl who looks down on you, when all I've ever wanted was for you to be proud of me. To see that I've built something meaningful on my own terms. We would have been proud of you no matter what you did, my mother said softly. If only you'd stayed. That was the moment I realized the fundamental truth. In my family's eyes, my crime wasn't pursuing a different path, it was leaving. Physical distance had been interpreted as emotional rejection, and no accomplishment would ever bridge that gap as long as I lived somewhere else, doing something else. I looked at each of their faces, these people I'd spent a lifetime trying to please while staying true to myself. I saw no understanding, no willingness to consider my perspective. Just hurt disguised as anger, and expectations I would never be able to meet without sacrificing everything I'd built. I came here today hoping for an explanation, I said, my voice steadier now. Maybe even an apology. But what I'm realizing is that there's nothing I could ever do, no success I could ever achieve, that would make you value me as I am rather than resent me for who I'm not. I turned to my extended family, who had witnessed this explosion in uncomfortable silence. And the rest of you? You chose sides. You lied to me. Some of you have known me my entire life, and not one of you had the courage to stand up and say this was wrong. No one responded. No one defended themselves or disagreed. Family isn't just sharing DNA or holidays, I continued, gathering my purse. It's supporting each other. Celebrating victories and comforting defeats. Telling hard truths but showing up when it matters. I moved toward the sliding door. I won't beg for a place at this table anymore. I won't apologize for the life I've chosen. And I won't keep trying to earn love that's supposed to be unconditional. Amber, don't be dramatic, Heather called after me. You can't just walk away from family. I turned back one last time. I'm not walking away from family. I'm finally accepting that I need to find mine elsewhere. The drive back to Boston was a blur, tears obscuring my vision so frequently that I had to pull over twice to collect myself. By the time I reached my apartment, I felt hollowed out, as if the confrontation had scooped out everything inside me, leaving nothing but an echoing emptiness. I entered my beautiful apartment, the dream home I'd worked so hard for, and saw it through new eyes. Not as a monument to my loneliness, but as the first true piece of the life I was building for myself. A life that would have to include a different kind of family than the one I was born into. I spent the next 24 hours in a fog of grief. I called in sick to work on Monday, something I rarely did, and moved around my apartment like a ghost, unable to settle or find comfort in the space I'd been so proud of just days before. Around noon, I found myself taking down the family photos from my gallery wall, one by one. Each image now seemed like evidence of a relationship I'd misunderstood my entire life. I placed them in a box, not ready to discard them entirely but needing them out of my sight. The emptiness of the walls matched the emptiness inside me. I'd built my entire adult life working toward goals my family would never appreciate, seeking approval they would never give. Who was I if not the daughter trying to prove herself? The sister trying to find her place? The niece and cousin maintaining connections across distance? I sat on my living room floor surrounded by blank walls and unanswered questions when my phone rang. It was Morgan, my friend from New York. Amber? Are you okay? I've been texting since last night. I hadn't even checked my messages. No, I admitted, my voice cracking. I'm not okay. What happened? Did no one else show up either? Through tears, I told her everything. The coordinated absences. The family dinner happening simultaneously. The confrontation that had exposed the true nature of my family relationships. Oh, Amber, Morgan sighed. I'm so sorry. There's no excuse for that. None. The worst part, I said, wiping my eyes, is that I keep wondering if they're right. Maybe I did abandon them. Maybe I do act superior without realizing it. Stop that right now, Morgan said firmly. Choosing your own path isn't abandonment. Being proud of your achievements isn't superiority. They're twisting things to justify their behavior. But. No buts. Listen to me. You are one of the most genuine, hardworking people I know. You've never once made me feel less than because I chose a different career or lifestyle. This is about their insecurities, not your actions. I wanted to believe her, but doubt had crept into every corner of my mind. I just feel so alone right now. I know. And I'm getting on the first train to Boston tomorrow morning. But for tonight, is there anyone nearby who could come over? You shouldn't be alone. I couldn't think of anyone. My closest friends in Boston were work colleagues who'd canceled on the housewarming. I'd been so focused on my career and saving for the apartment that I'd neglected building a local support system. I'll be fine, I lied. I just need to process everything. After we hung up, I curled up on the sofa again, staring at the ceiling. The beautiful apartment that had represented all my dreams now felt like an empty shell. What was the point of success if you had no one to share it with? As evening fell, I hadn't eaten all day but couldn't summon the energy to cook or order food. I sat in darkness as the city lights came on outside my window, casting patterns across my living room floor. A soft knock on my door startled me from my trance. Probably a package delivery or a neighbor with a misdirected mail. I considered ignoring it but finally dragged myself to the door. A young woman about my age stood in the hallway, holding what looked like a homemade chocolate cake. Hi, she said with a hesitant smile. I'm Zoe from 9B, down the hall? I heard crying earlier and wanted to check if everything's okay. I was mortified. Had I been that loud? I'm sorry about the noise, I said, attempting to compose myself though I knew my eyes were red and swollen. No, she rushed to clarify. The walls aren't that thin. I was just passing by earlier when I took my dog out and thought. Anyway, I baked this chocolate cake and it's way too much for one person, so I thought maybe. She trailed off, clearly feeling awkward. I should have politely declined, thanked her, and retreated back into my misery. But something about her genuine concern broke through the shell I'd been building around myself. That's really kind, I said, my voice raspy from crying. Would you like to come in? Zoe's smile brightened. I brought wine too, she admitted, producing a bottle from her tote bag. Baking is my stress response, drinking wine is my relaxation technique. Despite everything, I found myself laughing. Mine too, on both counts. I opened the door wider and led her into my kitchen, suddenly self-conscious about the emptiness of my apartment and the obvious signs that I'd been falling apart. Wow, your place is gorgeous, Zoe said, looking around appreciatively. I've been curious about the corner units. The light is amazing. Thanks, I said, finding plates for the cake. I just moved in a couple of weeks ago. Oh. You're the one who bought 9A. There was quite a buzz about it in the building chat. Everyone was placing bets on whether it was going to be another investment banker or a celebrity. I raised an eyebrow. There's a building chat? Yeah, on GroupMe. Didn't the management company tell you? It's mostly used for complaints about the garbage chute and alerts when someone's expecting a furniture delivery that will tie up the elevator. As we settled at my kitchen island with slices of incredibly rich chocolate cake and glasses of wine, Zoe's casual friendliness began to thaw the frozen grief inside me. "So," she said after a comfortable silence, "want to talk about why you were crying?" "Totally fine if you don't. We can discuss the suspicious stain in the basement laundry room instead." Something about her directness combined with her respect for my boundaries made me feel safe. Before I knew it, I was telling her the whole story: the apartment, the housewarming, the family boycott, the confrontation. "That's brutal," Zoe said when I finished. "Like, seriously messed up." "The thing is," I admitted, pouring us both more wine, "part of me has always known they didn't approve of my choices. I just never thought they'd actively try to hurt me like this." Zoe nodded thoughtfully. "You know, I went through something similar with my family. Not exactly the same, but the same feeling of fundamental rejection." "What happened?" I asked. "I came out as gay when I was 22. My parents are very religious, very conservative. They told me I could either get help for my condition or not be part of the family anymore." "I'm so sorry," I said, genuinely shocked. "What did you do?" "Cried for about 6 months," she said with a sad smile. "Then started building a new kind of family. Friends, mentors, my girlfriend at the time, her family who accepted me. It wasn't easy, and it still hurts sometimes, but I've created a support system of people who love me for exactly who I am." As she spoke, I felt a strange sense of recognition. Not of the specific circumstances, but of the emotional journey. The grief, the loss, the necessity of building something new from the ashes of what you thought you had. "Does it get better?" I asked quietly. "It gets different," she replied honestly. "The pain changes shape. Some days you barely notice it, other days it hits you all over again. But you build a life around it, and eventually, that life becomes rich enough that the absence isn't the only thing you feel anymore." We talked for hours, moving from my kitchen to the living room as the night deepened. Zoe told me about her job as a graphic designer, her rescue dog named Pixel, her journey to self-acceptance. I told her about my marketing career, my love of the city, my dream of creating a home that felt truly mine. Around 11, there was another knock at my door. Zoe and I exchanged confused glances. "Are you expecting someone?" she asked. I shook my head and went to check. Outside stood an older man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes. "Hi there," he said with a wave. "I'm Robert from 10A, right above you. Zoe texted the building chat that you were having an impromptu get-together, and I made way too much tiramisu this weekend." Before I could respond, the elevator dinged, and a woman in her 50s emerged holding a bottle of Prosecco. "Hope I'm not too late. I'm Diane from 8C. Brought bubbles." Over the next 30 minutes, my empty apartment filled with neighbors I'd never met. Marcus and Jason from 9C brought a cheese board. Elena from 7A arrived with her homemade sangria. Tom from 10B came down in his pajama pants and a dress shirt, explaining he'd been about to go to bed when he saw the building chat message. "What building chat message?" I asked Zoe as my living room filled with strangers bearing food and drinks. She showed me her phone with a slightly guilty smile. "New neighbor in 9A having an impromptu housewarming tonight. Chocolate cake and wine already in progress. Come say hi if you're free. She's lovely and could use some building community right now." I should have been embarrassed or annoyed at her presumption, but as I looked around at the strangers who had shown up simply because another stranger had suggested they might be needed, I felt something crack open inside me. A space where new connections could begin to grow. As the impromptu gathering continued, I learned that Robert was a retired history professor who made Italian desserts as a hobby. Diane was a divorce attorney who had lived in the building for 15 years and knew all its secrets. Marcus and Jason were newlyweds who had moved in just 3 months earlier. Elena was a nurse who worked night shifts and was thrilled to have somewhere to socialize on her rare evening off. They asked about my apartment renovation choices, recommended local restaurants and services, and shared building hacks that would never appear in an official welcome packet. No one pressed for details about why I could use some building community right now, though Zoe had clearly implied there was a story there. Around midnight, as the gathering showed no signs of dispersing, I found myself in the kitchen getting more ice when Robert approached. "Quite the housewarming," he said with a smile. "Not the one I planned," I admitted, "but somehow exactly what I needed." "Community has a way of finding you when you need it most," he said. "When my wife died 5 years ago, I was sure I'd never feel connected to anyone again. Then the dishwasher in this building flooded my apartment and 3 others on the floor. We all ended up in the hallway at 2 a.m. in various states of undress, watching maintenance try to stop the water. Been friends ever since." I laughed. "So I should hope for a plumbing disaster? Or just keep your door open to unexpected cake deliveries," he said with a wink, nodding toward Zoe, who was animatedly describing something to Elena and Diane. By the time everyone left around 1 a.m., I had a dozen new contacts in my phone, 3 invitations to future gatherings, and a sense of possibility I hadn't felt since before the disastrous Sunday confrontation with my family. As I helped Zoe clean up the last of the glasses, she looked at me tentatively. "I hope that wasn't overstepping. Texting everyone, I mean. You just seemed like you needed people around, and this building has some really good ones." "It was exactly what I needed," I assured her. I'd been so focused on trying to maintain connections with a family that doesn't want to connect with me that I never invested in building community here, where I actually live. "Well," she said, giving me a quick hug before heading to the door, "consider this your official welcome to the Beacon Hill Apartments family. We're dysfunctional in our own ways, but we show up for cake and wine, guaranteed." After she left, I stood in my living room, surveying the evidence of the unexpected gathering. Empty wine glasses, cake crumbs, napkins, and the lingering warmth of conversation and laughter. For the first time since the disastrous Sunday with my biological family, I felt something other than grief and rejection. The apartment that had felt so empty now held echoes of new connections, potential friendships, the beginning of something I hadn't even known I was looking for. I picked up my phone to text Morgan and saw a message from Zoe that had come in while I was saying goodbye to the others. "Brunch next Sunday? A bunch of us go to Tat on Charles Street. No pressure, but there's a standing invitation if you want to join the Sunday brunch club." Sunday. The day my family gathered without me. The day I had felt most alone. I texted back, "I'd love to. Thank you for everything tonight." As I got ready for bed, I glanced at the box of family photos I'd removed from the walls. They still hurt to look at, but the pain wasn't the only thing I felt anymore. There was also a flicker of something new taking root, the possibility that family might be something I could choose and build, rather than something I had to be born into and endlessly strive to please. I fell asleep that night with the strange sense that I'd hit rock bottom and found an unexpected foundation there, something solid upon which I might begin to build again. The weeks following my family confrontation unfolded in ways I never could have anticipated. Morgan arrived from New York the next day as promised, armed with comfort food, trashy magazines, and fierce loyalty. She helped me process what had happened, validating my feelings while gently challenging my tendency to blame myself for my family's behavior. "You know what the hardest part of this is going to be," she said as we shared Thai food on my living room floor. "Learning to stop seeking their approval. It's a habit you've had your entire life." She was right. Even as I nursed my hurt and anger, some part of me was still strategizing how to make them see my side, how to finally earn the validation I'd been chasing for so long. Before Morgan left, she helped me implement what she called family contact boundaries. My mother had been calling and texting as if nothing had happened, sending casual messages about neighborhood gossip and asking if I'd tried a new recipe she'd seen on TV. It was her way of papering over conflict, pretending everything was normal when it profoundly wasn't. I decided to limit contact to once a week, a Sunday text or brief call where I would be polite but not intimate, engaged but not vulnerable. I muted the family group chat that had never included me in its plans but still expected me to react to its photos and announcements. With my father, I maintained distance. He hadn't reached out since the confrontation, and I wasn't ready to breach that silence. With Heather, I responded to direct messages about the children but didn't initiate contact. These boundaries created space, painful at first, like a phantom limb I kept reaching for, but gradually filled with new connections and experiences that began to reshape my definition of support and belonging. The Sunday after the confrontation, I joined Zoe and the Sunday brunch club at Tat. I arrived nervously, half expecting to find the table full with no room for me, a childhood fear that had followed me into adulthood. Instead, I found Zoe waving enthusiastically, a seat saved between her and Robert. "The newcomer gets first pick of the pastries," Diane announced, pushing a basket of croissants and scones toward me. Building tradition. That first brunch stretched to nearly 3 hours, conversation flowing easily among this eclectic group of neighbors who had somehow formed a chosen family of their own. They argued good-naturedly about politics, shared building gossip, and offered genuinely helpful advice about everything from career decisions to kitchen renovations. I left with the strange, almost forgotten feeling of being seen and accepted exactly as I was, no familial expectations or historical roles to fulfill, just the simple pleasure of connection without agenda. The following week, I had dinner with my marketing team after work, something I'd often declined in the past to catch up on projects or save money for my apartment fund. We shared stories about nightmare clients and ambitious career goals, staying until the restaurant closed. I realized I'd been holding these colleagues at arm's length, focused so intently on proving myself professionally that I'd missed the community forming around me. Zoe introduced me to her wider friend circle at a gallery opening, where I met Tara, a lawyer with a passion for urban gardening who offered to help me set up planters on my small balcony. Through Tara, I connected with a community garden project where I started spending Saturday mornings, getting my hands dirty alongside strangers who quickly became familiar faces. Morgan visited monthly, our friendship deepening as I opened up more honestly about my family wounds rather than minimizing them as I had for years. She introduced me to her therapist who practiced remotely, and I began weekly sessions that helped me understand the patterns I'd been trapped in and how to begin breaking free of them. Grieving your fantasy of what your family should be is different from grieving a death, my therapist explained during one particularly difficult session. There's no closure, no finality. The possibility of reconciliation, however unlikely, keeps the wound open. Learning to live with that ambiguity is part of the process. Through therapy, I began to see how my drive for success had been tangled up with the hope of finally earning my family's approval. How I'd made career choices and life decisions with one eye always on their potential reactions. How exhausting it had been to live for an audience that had never fully shown up to watch the performance. As summer turned to fall, my apartment transformed alongside my internal landscape. I replaced the family photos with art from local street fairs and photographs I'd taken on walks through my beloved Boston. I painted the second bedroom a deep teal and set it up as a proper home office rather than the guest room I'd planned for family visits that would likely never happen. The building community continued to weave itself into my life in unexpected ways. Elena from 7A needed a pet sitter for her cat while working night shifts, and I discovered the therapeutic pleasure of having a purring companion during difficult evenings. Robert from 10A taught a monthly cooking class in the building's community room, where I learned to make pasta from scratch and connected with neighbors from other floors. On the career front, I approached my work with a new perspective. Without the driving need to prove my worth through achievement, I found myself making choices based on what genuinely interested and fulfilled me rather than what would look impressive from the outside. I turned down a promotion that would have required constant travel and instead proposed a new content strategy that allowed me more creative control and better work-life balance. My mother continued her pretense of normalcy in our limited communications, never addressing the confrontation or its aftermath. During one Sunday call, she mentioned casually that Heather was pregnant with her third child. "The family is getting together next month for a gender reveal party," she said. "It would mean a lot if you could come." The old Amber would have immediately agreed, desperate for inclusion and hoping this invitation signaled forgiveness and acceptance. The new Amber paused, consulting her inner wisdom rather than her lifelong hunger for approval. "I'll need to check my calendar," I said honestly. "Things are pretty busy here." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. My mother had expected immediate gratitude for the chance to be included. My measured response disrupted the script. Well, let me know, she finally said. Your father is coming around, you know. He asks about you sometimes. I recognized the carrot being dangled, the possibility of my father's approval, the thing I'd chased my entire life. But now it produced more sadness than hope, more clarity than desperation. That's good to hear, I said neutrally. I'll let you know about the party. After careful consideration and a therapy session devoted to the decision, I declined the invitation with a polite text and sent a gender-neutral baby gift from an online registry. It was a small act of self-protection, an acknowledgement that I wasn't ready to re-enter the family dynamic that had caused so much pain, especially not for a celebration that would highlight Heather's adherence to the approved family path. The strangest part was how anticlimactic it felt to decline. The world didn't end. My sense of self didn't collapse. I felt a twinge of sadness but also a profound relief, like removing shoes that had always been too tight. One unexpected connection emerged during this period. My youngest cousin, Grace, who had recently graduated from high school, reached out via Instagram direct message. I'm applying to colleges in Boston, she wrote. Mom says I shouldn't bother you, but I could really use some advice from someone who's actually done it. We began a correspondence that evolved into weekly video chats. Grace confided that she'd always admired my choice to forge my own path, though she'd been careful not to say so at family gatherings. She was experiencing similar pressure to stay close to home, study something practical, and maintain the family's geographic cohesion. Everyone keeps saying college is just 4 years but family is forever, she told me during one call. But what if those 4 years could change my entire life trajectory? What if I discover who I really am away from everyone's expectations? I recognized my younger self in her questions, in the hope and fear tangled together at the prospect of choosing herself over family expectations. I was careful not to impose my experience on hers but offered perspective and validation that her desires mattered, that building her life according to her own blueprint was not selfish but necessary. Whatever you decide, I told her, make sure it's your choice. Not a reaction to their pressure or my example. Your path is yours alone. In late October, I hosted a dinner party in my apartment, not a replacement housewarming, but a deliberate gathering of the people who had become important in my new life. Zoe and some of the building neighbors, colleagues from work, friends from the community garden, Morgan who traveled up from New York. As we shared a meal around my dining table, conversation flowing and laughter filling the space that had once echoed with my lonely tears, I looked around at these people who had no obligation to me through blood or history but who showed up anyway, who saw me clearly and valued what they saw. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother, another casual message that ignored the chasm between us, but for the first time I felt no compulsion to check it immediately, to prioritize that tenuous connection over the vibrant ones surrounding me in real time. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and I was tidying up, I found myself standing at the window, looking out at the city lights. The apartment that had once felt like an empty monument to my isolation now held the energy and memories of genuine connection. The space had become truly mine, filled with chosen relationships rather than obligatory ones. I thought about the version of myself who had stood in this same spot months earlier, devastated by rejection and questioning her entire life path. She could never have imagined this evolution, this gradual construction of a life built on authenticity rather than approval-seeking. The journey wasn't complete. The pain of family estrangement still surfaced in unexpected moments. There were still nights I scrolled through old photos and mourned what might have been. But increasingly, those moments were balanced by a new sense of possibility, a growing confidence in my ability to create meaningful connections on my own terms. I had spent 32 years trying to earn a place at a table that kept being pulled away. Now I was building my own table, with room for everyone who chose to show up with open hearts and genuine intentions. And surprisingly, it felt like enough. More than enough. It felt like home. 6 months after my original housewarming disaster, I stood in my kitchen arranging a charcuterie board for an entirely different kind of gathering. The marble countertops were covered with appetizers, wine bottles stood ready to be opened, and a playlist I'd curated filled the apartment with soft background music. This wasn't a replacement housewarming, I'd long since passed that milestone, but rather a celebration of the life and community I'd built in the half-year since that painful turning point. I'd labeled it a chosen family dinner in the invitations, a name that had once felt like a consolation prize but now carried its own distinct value. Zoe arrived first, predictably early and bearing her signature chocolate cake. "Can't break tradition," she grinned, placing it on the counter before helping me finish the food arrangements. In the months since our unexpected first meeting, she had become my closest local friend, the person I texted with random thoughts and joined for impromptu weeknight dinners. The others arrived in quick succession, Robert with his homemade limoncello, Diane bringing flowers from her country house, Morgan who had taken the train from New York for the weekend. My colleagues Jason and Lindsay came with their partners, as did several friends from the community garden project. James, the architectural photographer I'd been dating for 2 months, arrived with a vintage botanical print he'd found at an estate sale, knowing my growing passion for urban gardening. As I watched them mingle, pouring drinks, sharing stories, laughing easily together, I marveled at how quickly and organically this network had formed. These connections hadn't required me to contort myself to fit expectations or suppress parts of my personality. I hadn't needed to prove my worth through achievement or conformity. I had simply shown up authentically, vulnerably, and found others doing the same. The doorbell rang again just as I was refreshing the ice bucket. When I opened it, I froze in surprise. My mother stood in the hallway, clutching her purse with both hands, looking smaller and more uncertain than I had ever seen her. "Mom," I said, unable to mask my shock. "I didn't know you were coming to Boston." "I should have called first," she said, her eyes darting past me to the gathering inside. "You're having a party. I can come back another time." Part of me wanted to agree, to protect this safe new space from the complications of my family history. But another part recognized the courage it must have taken for her to come here alone, to cross the boundary I'd established through distance and limited contact. "No, it's okay," I said, stepping back to let her in. "Come join us." I introduced her simply as my mom, Diana, without explanation or backstory, and my friends welcomed her with the same warmth they showed everyone. She seemed both relieved and disoriented by the casual acceptance, as if she'd been bracing for hostility that never materialized. As the evening progressed, I watched my mother observe this life I'd built, so different from the one she knew, the one she had helped shape for my sister. She commented on the apartment, admiring the renovation choices she'd never seen in person. She asked questions about my work that went beyond the superficial inquiries of our Sunday calls. She listened intently to my friends' stories, getting glimpses of the person I was when not performing the role of daughter. After dinner, while others gathered in the living room, my mother joined me in the kitchen as I brewed coffee. "This is a lovely home you've made," she said quietly. "And lovely friends." "Thank you," I replied, measuring coffee grounds. "They've become important to me." She nodded, watching my movements. "I've been thinking a lot about that Sunday." "About what you said?" I tensed slightly but continued preparing the coffee. "Which part?" "About family being the people who show up. Who support each other." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I haven't been that for you." "Not consistently." It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement of the harm done that I'd received from any family member. Not quite an apology, but an opening, a crack in the wall of denial. "No," I agreed simply. "You haven't. Your father and I." She began, then stopped herself. "No, I shouldn't blame him. I made my own choices too. We got so caught up in what we thought your life should look like that we couldn't see the beautiful one you were actually building." I turned to face her directly. "Why did you come here today, Mom?" She looked down at her hands, twisted together in a familiar gesture of anxiety. "Heather had the baby last week. A girl. They named her Diana, after me." Her voice caught. "It should have been one of the happiest moments of my life, and it was, but you weren't there." And I realized I didn't want to lose another important moment with my other daughter. The simple honesty of her statement pierced through my carefully constructed defenses. Not a manipulation or a guilt trip, but a genuine expression of loss and regret. "I'm not ready to jump back into family gatherings as if nothing happened," I said carefully. "I've spent too many years pretending things were fine when they weren't." "I understand," she nodded. "I'm not asking for that. I thought maybe we could start small. Just you and me sometimes. Getting to know each other as we are now, not who we used to be." It was a modest proposal, tentative and respectful of the boundaries I'd established. Not a demand for forgiveness or an immediate return to the fold, but an invitation to begin something new. "I'd like that," I said finally. "Coffee, once in a while. Maybe brunch." Relief softened her face. "I'd like that too." We carried the coffee and desserts to the living room where James was showing Robert photos from his latest architectural shoot. Zoe immediately pulled my mother into a conversation about her cake recipe, creating space for her with the same ease she'd shown me months earlier. As the evening continued, I found myself in a conversation with Morgan and James by the window, watching my mother laugh at something Diane had said. "How are you doing with this surprise visitor?" Morgan asked quietly. "It's complicated," I admitted. "But in a good way, I think. At least she came alone, on my turf, without expectations." James, who knew my family history in broad strokes, squeezed my hand supportively. "Healthy boundaries make healthy relationships possible. You've done the hard work of establishing those boundaries." Morgan nodded in agreement. "And look how much stronger you are now. 6 months ago, her showing up might have sent you into an emotional tailspin. Tonight, you're navigating it with grace." They were right. The work I'd done, in therapy, in building new connections, in defining myself outside of family expectations, had created a foundation strong enough to withstand this unexpected development without crumbling. Later that week, I had coffee with my mother at a cafe halfway between Boston and Westford. The conversation was sometimes awkward, sometimes surprisingly easy, as we carefully felt our way toward a new kind of relationship. She mentioned that Heather had been asking about me, making tentative overtures about reconnection on new terms. "And Dad?" I asked, stirring my latte. "He's processing," she said diplomatically. "He doesn't talk about it much, but he kept the Father's Day card you sent. It's on his dresser." It was a small thing, but significant coming from a man who had never been demonstrative with emotions. The card had been a brief acknowledgement of the day without pretense of having resolved our conflicts. That he had kept it rather than discarding it suggested some softening, however slight. Over the following months, these careful reconnections continued alongside the flourishing of my chosen family connections. Sunday brunches with the building crew remained a fixed point in my week. My relationship with James deepened as we discovered shared values beneath our different careers and backgrounds. Morgan and I planned a summer trip to Portugal, fulfilling a long-held dream. The balance was delicate, maintaining healthy boundaries with my family of origin while nurturing the vibrant connections I'd built on my own terms. There were still difficult moments, still times when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. My father remained largely distant, though he had begun acknowledging my birthday and holidays with brief texts. Heather and I exchanged periodic messages about her children but had yet to rebuild a relationship independent of our shared history. But increasingly, I found peace in the understanding that completion didn't require perfect resolution with every family member. That some relationships might always remain limited in scope, and that was okay. The fullness in my life came from the sum of all my connections, some blood-related, most not, each contributing different forms of support, understanding, and belonging. One evening in early spring, almost a year after I'd first received the keys to my apartment, I hosted a dinner for James, Zoe, and Morgan. As we sat around my dining table, sharing a meal I'd cooked and stories from our various weeks, I was struck by the simple rightness of the moment. The apartment that had once been a symbol of achievement, then of rejection, had finally become simply home, a place where I felt fully myself, surrounded by people who valued me for exactly who I was. "You know what I realized today?" I said as we lingered over dessert. A year ago, I thought this apartment would prove something to my family. That it would finally make them see me, respect my choices. But that was never the point. What was the point? James asked, refilling wine glasses. I looked around at these people who had become essential to my life in ways I could never have imagined when standing alone in my empty apartment. The point was creating a space that reflects who I truly am. A foundation for building the life I actually want, not the one someone else prescribed for me. To foundations, Morgan said, raising her glass. And to the houses, literal and figurative, that we build on them. As we clinked glasses, I thought about the journey of the past year, the painful rejection that had forced me to confront my deepest insecurities, the rock bottom that had unexpectedly provided solid ground for rebuilding, and the gradual assembly of a life more authentic and fulfilling than the one I had desperately sought approval for. The relationship with my family continued to evolve, sometimes forward, sometimes back. Some wounds would never fully heal, some expectations would never be met on either side. But I had finally stopped measuring my worth by their validation and started recognizing it in the quality of my connections, the integrity of my choices, and the courage to live authentically even when that meant standing alone. Sometimes the family we need isn't the one we're born into but the one we build along the way, person by person, moment by moment, choice by choice. And sometimes the dreams we achieve become meaningful not because of who they impress but because of who they allow us to become. That night, surrounded by my chosen family in the home I had created, I understood with perfect clarity, I was no longer waiting for anyone to show up at my door with approval or validation. I had already found everything I needed within these walls and within myself. What about you? Have you ever had to build your own version of family or community when traditional relationships disappointed you? How did you find your people? Drop a comment below and let me know your story. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in navigating complicated family dynamics. Thank you for being part of my journey, and I'll see you in the next video.